Misha here, and finally we have something new to talk about with the Steyr AUG, specifically the 9mm Para, or the MP88, or the police training kit, if you want to call it. This is mine that I've had for just over a decade, and it's been bouncing between receivers for a while, and I've finally found a home for it. The charging handle kind of tips off what I've done here, but we'll go into it later. I really want to talk about this because there's a lot of interest now with 2 or 3 different releases via Steyr, not to mention the heresy 9mm conversions. And there's some really good information online, and also a couple of big misunderstandings. So I want to cover that. And of course it's me, so we'll go over the generations of the Steyr AUG, because it's pretty cool that they're back in the country finally. You can do conversion kits, and there's actually a couple of different styles, mainly to do with the magazines they take, and complete rifles, a couple of different styles, one of which is much harder to get than the other and is actually leading to a lot of confusion online as I see it. With that, before we dive in and also pop a few rounds through this, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to help support us, you can do a super thanks on here, or you can visit Patreon. Go again. That's just a lot of fun. I used an AUG A3 M1 receiver for this kit, and it does have the longer Picatinny rail, the 16 slaughter. And while the 1.5 or 3, or in the case of some of the LMG types, 4 power optic was the norm for many a year, these days even Austria is moving to kind of this style of setup. Now it's not correct, they usually have like aim points, but a flip magnifier in addition to a modern day red dot. So I had this on, actually stayed on my CZ805 for a number of years, and I thought it'd be good for the 9mm. What do you think? But really what makes the M1 better than the original A3, this rail is modular, and where it's better than the A2. The original A2, you could pull your optic off using a bullet tip and put on a rail, but that was kind of a metal on metal wear system and just wouldn't always hold zero forever. What they've done here is kind of go back a step, and it goes on, but it's held on with screws, and then some also have a roll pin, so you don't have that sliding action going on. On top of that, with the M1, we have a QD front, which is just kind of a cool thing. It hurts nothing. And there's other things, but those are really the differences with the M1. And it led, of course, directly to the M2, and it itself is inspired by the Austrian Commandos, the A3 SF. My kit is what is known by collectors as a Generation 6, although Steyr goes by a different convention, and these came in limited numbers to 300 in 2014, and were quickly shut down because of this component. The ATF just didn't like that they were importing the barrels. First they let them in for sporting, there never was a recall, but no more came in, and that kind of ended it because Steyr in the US it wasn't worth making new barrels. It has some unique features and has been changed a bit over the years. We'll get through. Of course, another major component is the bolt. Not really a bolt carrier, it's just a blowback bolt. And over the years, the rods have changed a bit, and the roller. We'll get there as we go through the generations. And then, of course, probably the most intricate part, very Steyr of them, is the magwell adapter block. This has probably changed more than any other component. It's actually very complex, and the Generation 6 is the last to actually use the block. We're up to Generation 7 now, and because of machining costs and everything, they've finally gotten rid of it, and that's because it's meant to take the mag here. This is technically, because of this, a Steyr AUG 9mm mag, but what it really is an update of an MPI 69, MPI 81, which were kind of based on the Uzi, but their own thing too, mag that they made before in Austria. And when they made this as the MP88, they carried over the mags and then slightly updated them very soon after in the 90s to work better. And while the mags are super interesting, they're also kind of this kit's Achilles heel because they were never easy to find and they've gotten downright rare today. So with that, let's show just how versatile and compatible this kit system really is and talk about history and generations. It's that time of year again to dust her off. She is doing good. Still have an issue with my bolt hold back. Need to work on it just a little bit more. Oh well, I like projects. Having a problem with my bolt hold open, I always have. It seems slow to come up. See? And it can be overridden pretty good. If you press on the mag, it seems to work a little better. And this one actually does not have an active release because the spare trigger pack I happen to have was out of a NATO stock. Here the kit is in my pre-band Steyr AUG SA, often the AUG A1. Just goes to show you, even though they're made decades apart, went in fine. And this is really the first look, paying no attention to the black grip. But other than that, you know, green stock, 1.5 power Swarovski, donut of death sight, what have you. Work began on the 9mm Para around 1985, and it was first shown off more or less in Europe, German language, in 1988. And this is actually where the designation Matchdown Pistol 88, MP88 comes from, because that year Austrian police, like the federal police, adopted it. Also, Cobra Echo adopted it. So there goes the designation. And, you know, it didn't change a whole lot. It originally had a 420mm, so about 17-inch barrel. It did have integrated ports early on. It could or could not be threaded depending on the contract. One thing I always found interesting is, at least the ones I've seen, the front grip doesn't fold. Probably a few reasons. You know, suppressor use is one, and just kind of getting your barrel there. Of course, this one is threaded, but originally wouldn't have been. And it is, of course, just a direct blowback gun. And they simply make the bolt more massive. And originally it just used the same stock and even the same magwell. You just put in this little conversion. It's clever using the same magwell, even using the original mag catch to lock it in. No set screws, anything like that needed. Except this is a very integrated part to machine. Even the Gen 6 here, maybe even more so than early on. And from the get-go, they took these pretty cool trapezoidal 25 round mags that were carried over, like I said earlier, from the MP69, MP81. First ones didn't have the notch there in them. And they just go straight in as such. And all your bits and bobs, including your ejector, are part of it. And you have a secondary metal catch here. This would actually be the component that sees the most improvements and changes over time, though. They say that Steyr AUGs have bad triggers. I'm just not sure I agree. Okay, to the present day, it's been said that There are 88 limited edition so-called MP88 Simanos in America in 2025. True. And they look like this. Green stock, 1.5 power fixed optic. It says integral on the website. I don't know if it uses kind of the M1 style removable, kind of like the STG-77. I kind of assume it did, but it could be the single piece casting. I'll be honest, I would prefer the removable, because even from the beginning on the 5.56 guns, the fact that your optic is literally part of your metal receiver is a little problematic, as you can imagine. So being able to swap your optic out if it gets damaged or needs repair makes sense. So those are the 88 limited ones, and I think they're pretty well all sold out. What's confusing people is there's also the MP88 M2 on the market, and it's not a limited edition. It might be a special run thing, but they only do so many a year. Hard to say because this is the first year, but I've seen that confusion. So to be one of the limited ones, you gotta have the optic on it. Let's see if ejection's still fine if I flip the magnifier over. I was kind of curious. Apparently so. Not bad. Also, these do ship with the magwell, and I don't believe they're new production. I believe they're kind of using up existing leftover stock from Austria, because the Gen 7s are now out and go a whole very different direction. Now, like I said, the original version looked like this. And in 1990, you started to see talk about the AUG para in Western literature, English language. And then it starts to spread outside of Europe. Now, like I said, the Austrians would use it. Germany, like Bavaria police would use it. The Belgian federal police would use it, so on and so forth. But after that, it would actually spread out, either as a kit or a complete bullpup. They sold it both ways to users of the AUG, like Ireland and Australia. This was attractive. It was kind of marketed as police training, and also something that was easier to suppress. Early on, they didn't so much lean into that, but later they would. And in the very early 90s, they would go to the updated ejection port, because they were having some problems with the small 223 ports, sometimes bouncing empties back in, or more importantly, extraction, because your ejector is in your block here. If you took your block out and had one in the chamber, you see the problem, right? You take your ejector away, how are you going to eject your 9mm? It could come right back into the chamber. Either way, they put the larger port on, and that seemed to solve at least some of their problems. And there's a couple of different ways. Some of them early on were kind of bolt-on. Later, they would just make a new mold, and these would still be in green. Other changes, again, to the insert, they would add the feedway scallops to the ramp, and they would kind of continually tinker with the ejector there. They would eventually make it an all-metal integrated piece of housing. On the barrel, they would change the feed ramp a bit to assist in loading hollow points. Also, as I mentioned a minute ago, the early ones sometimes had ports for muzzle recoil. They would get rid of those in the 90s. They weren't really useful with this long barrel and all the weight this gun has been. It's like 7.5 pounds because of the heavier carrier. And they were also making it harder to use for suppressors, and the 1/2x28 threading would become more and more common. Barrels were at that 420 millimeter, and they still are today, but you would see shorter ones, 350, 365, so, 13.8, give or take, call it 14 inches, 14.5 inches. More recently, a 325 is more common, like a 12.8, so little tweaks to the overall length of the barrel, and that's really about it. I'm trying to think, the op rods, if you want to call them that, change up a little bit over time. The machining, the way the bolts machine changes a little bit over time. But this whole generation, like I said, my kit's a Gen 6. It's incremental changes. And these aren't even generations that Steyr talks about. It's extremely unlikely that any 9mm AUGs came in before the March '89 ban. Maybe a few early Gen 1 kits, although probably just nothing more than samples. No, because Steyr wasn't really trying to market these until 1990, which was when the Gen 2 came out, the one to first feature a bolt holdback. Now, we did get a small number of Gen 4 kits in years later, around 175, most sources say, and these seem to have been Kuwait government, probably police, maybe special forces, kit overruns. Very small little batch years ago. Alright, let's try some Phoenix 115 in this, just see what it does. It's meant for, you know, NATO 124 ammo, but, you know, let's find out. I'd say pretty good. That's it. Gen 4, even into Gen 5, these were still being used in the early 2000s with what was the AUG A2 at that point. But then, a couple of years later, we get the AUG A3, the first true Picatinny rail version. And then the Gen 5 moves over to the Gen 6 we have here. And let's finish her off. Here we have it. Expressly designed to work with the new A3 lineup and all that entailed, the Gen 6 had a couple of improvements. Notice this is on a M1 QD with the removable rail. It's again, this kind of the host receiver I've found, notwithstanding the mismatched charging handle. And this is, of course, that larger ejection port. Note that there is not one on the left. Manual bolt there. So on and so forth, all the same. But I think one of the neat and very thoughtful changes to the 6 is actually internal to here. They also would improve the finish around Gen 5, Gen 6 too. But I told you this was the same catch to release this block. But you can't. They introduced a new feature that kept it in there if a magazine was installed, which we see here. As I get to the end of this mag, I want to see if the hold open's working any better. Probably not, but sometimes things working in helps. Nope. Still being janky. What's funny is, I just press up on the mag, just a bit, and it works. Yeah. And with our mag out, yeah, you can easily pull our block out now. That's a pretty cool little thing, and all it really is, it's, hear that rattling? It's this little free-floating divot here that just locks lightly into the front of the mag well. So when a mag's in, it sticks out. Just a little bit of thing. Just, I get it, even though you have this kind of shark fin here to protect the catch and it normally wouldn't get hit, it doesn't hurt anything. Of course, this is getting to be a very spendy piece of kit to machine, and that kind of explains our Gen 7s. But really, according to Steyr, they're kind of like Gen 3s, I guess. Because really they consider this still a Gen 2. The Gen 1 was the version without any kind of bolt hold open. It very quickly disappeared in the first couple of years. The Gen 2 would stretch from the early 90s really through this kit when they were imported here back in 2014. We don't really know how many of these kits came in for sure. I've seen low of 200, 300 is often repeated. My particular notes say 350. I think I got that from Pete's back in the day, but take it for what you were. Under 500. We can easily say that because the ATF put the kind of kibosh on it. But that was really it. And it worked well for a while, but it just got too expensive. So we kind of moved to the Gen 3 or Gen 7 starting in 2023. Okay, I'm going to try something you're not supposed to do with pretty much any submachine gun type. I'm going to rest it on the magazine with that upward pressure and see what happens. Well, if I tap it, it does, but oh, it's always going to be something, guys. And this big change really wasn't because these guns weren't reliable, dependable, durable. They'd really worked out everything by this point. I think I hit you in the camera. Oh well. It was because these mags, which were never a common standard, were just getting impossible to find, in addition to this block becoming very tedious to machine. Kind of reminds me of the muzzle brake on the 24-inch heavy barrel. Cool, effective brake, but pretty stressful to get machined. So what they have done in modern times, and they just sell these as a, police training conversion kit, is what they call them on their website. Or you can buy it as a complete AUG A3 9mm para gun. You basically get a new waffle mag that splits the difference between 25 and 32 at 28 rounds. And it doesn't need this adapter block. It just goes straight into the standard magwell. But because your ejector was on this block, they moved the ejector to the trigger pack. So now you have a new trigger pack, whereas before this used standard trigger packs. Another benefit there, though, is you don't really need the unique buttstock. They do sell it, but I think once they run out, they're not going to make more because the large ejection port with the hood was no longer necessary. The bolt carrier does not seem to have changed much. The barrel does not seem to have changed much, or at least not that I've noticed. The two barrel lengths I see offered are the 12.8 and the 16.5 these days, basically 17 inches. And threading 1/2 by 28 seems to basically be a standard now for suppressor use, because this is well suited for that. It'll just be interesting to see about this, because it's still taking a proprietary mag. At least that's kind of the official gen. But there is another version that's on their website for more kind of commercial sales. Kind of back to my hold open issue. I'd mentioned I'm using the trigger pack out of a NATO version, because that's kind of where the receiver came from. Let me swap it out with the pack from my earlier A3 meant for Steyr mags and see if that's any better. So, held open on the manual attempt there on an empty, so I think we're making progress. Honestly, dry firing it, messing with it, it seemed to be, but once I shot it, no. And if I slam the mag in, you notice it pushes it up all the way. But if I just ease that mag in, it pushes it up some, but look, it catches there. The spring isn't quite forceful enough to overcome that little rough area. And since I'm out here at the cabin, I don't have my full tool set. It's a minor thing. I mean, it's a bolt hold open. As you've seen, reliability is in no way. See there, and again, it's just kind of not quite there. Push it up, no problems. So more force. I'll work on it. Gives me something to do. I'll get her smoothed out. Steyr Arms USA also offers a version with a block that takes Colt 9mm AR mags, which is actually pretty cool. Those are a lot more ubiquitous. You do need a block. I believe Knights Armament has something to do with that, or at least they're basing it on the Knights Armament block system. So that's another option to use, more common mags, but then you're kind of back to needing the adapter block. But it's really because these MP69, MP81 mags, again, to work with the bolt hold open, they ended up being AUG 9mm mags and kind of unique anyway, and never really used in anything else. Kind of related to the Steyr GB, but I've had a GB before, and even then they're pretty different. You know, and this one's all in black. I should also mention, about the time they switched over to the A3 compatible ones, maybe a little before, they were in black. Also, some of the police ones were in black. You know, Steyr's done different colors over the years. Should also mention that there was a version called the Steyr A3 XS Para 9mm that was kind of this variation here with that. So you Steyr, they do all kinds of variants. So this is hung around. And they are still getting new contracts. They got a contract for a 40 cal version, of all things, in 2020 for the Sao Paulo Police Department down in Brazil, which is kind of interesting because they also recently purchased the Kuna from HS Products, and again, 40 Smith & Wesson. So someone's kind of keeping a candle alive for that caliber. And it's really neat that these are coming back in America with, again, 2 different conversion kit options, a rifle option. Just know that the MP88 with the optic, that's the limited edition. The MP88 M2, as it's sometimes known, that's the standard edition with a pick rail and, you know, pretty much looks like this. And I believe it's even marked AUG A3 M1 on the receiver, so no real special markings. Of course, they don't really charge a whole lot for them either. Try inserting the bolt's open. See if that helps it. No. It is when manually. As collectors, we're absolutely welcome, even encouraged, to really divide it into 7 generations, and you can argue this and that. But really, there's 3. The original, pretty short-lived, was the one without the hold open. And then Generation 2 really spans from what we think of as collectors as Gen 2 all the way up through Gen 6 here. It's that whole group. Because technically nothing much changed. They had the bolt hold open, all of them. They all had the magwell insert, even if materials and styling changed a bit, and you got a few new features like the safety lock where you can't, you know, eject your magwell without the magazine being pulled out first. And yeah, we updated the barrel a little bit. Better use for suppressors. But to Steyr, those are just incremental changes. Some reason on like the A1, they didn't change its name when they added like the roller to the back of the carrier or any of that stuff. And now we're in the Gen 3 that it takes an all-new type of mag, no longer uses a magwell insert, but does need a new trigger pack, fire control group. Makes sense. I'm curious, which style do you think you like best? They're fun, they're reliable, they are a little heavy, but because of the long barrel, you do get some pretty good range and velocity out of your bullets. They suppress well. You get the common ergonomics of the AUG, and I will say that the AUG trigger has dramatically improved over the years. It's not near what people make it out to be, especially when you're shooting and having fun. And it is fun. I like getting this out every year or so and just running some rounds through it, doing all that. But let me know what you think. Do you have one of the 2014 kits, or did you get one of the new kits? Or did you get one of the new rifles? Or were you one of the guys that got one of the handful of MP88s, or maybe an MP8? Let me know in the comments what you've got. I think it's cool. And let me know why you picked up the AUG. Personally, I have always liked this more than like the Devore 9mm, because it is a toolless, very easy conversion. Either generation you go with, the barrels drop in, the bolts drop in, the mag or magwell conversion drops in. Really the only downside to at least this variant are the mags. They're cool, they work fine, but you can't get them. But yeah, let me know what you think's in the comments below. And if you'd like to help support us, check out the link to Patreon, or you can do a super thanks here on YouTube. With that, this is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.